You're listening to DIY World Improvement. I'm your host, Catherine Carlozzi. I have a very clear memory of something that happened shortly after 9/11. Alberto, the owner of the yard service I've used for 25 years, told me he'd gone to Ground Zero to volunteer his services. He was a construction worker before he moved to the United States many years ago, and he was sure that his skills would be needed and useful, but they turned him away. This big bear of a man stood on my lawn, and he literally cried on my shoulder. Like so many, he had just wanted to find a way to help. Before that terrible day, my guest, Lisa Orloff, had her own successful knitwear company. But unlike Alberto, Lisa was able to get involved as a volunteer in post-9/11 efforts in New York City. Her experiences changed her life, leading her to drop out of the world of fashion to create World Care Center. The not-for-profit organization has found a way to tap one of the most valuable emergency resources, people like Lisa and Alberto who just want to help. Lisa, welcome to DIY World Improvement.
Thank you, Catherine.
You made a visit to Ground Zero on 9/12, the day after, and you ended up coordinating a piece of the relief effort in New York City. Talk about that. I'm especially interested in what prepared you to take on something like that and how that led to you creating the World Care Center.
Actually, I was awoken to watch the events of 9/11 unfold on TV, and I thought at first it was a movie. I was surprised to see and learn that it was something that was real. One of the first things I did was to go to the store and start to cook for the people that I thought would be coming to our home and staying with us. Some of the friends that we had that worked down at Ground Zero actually got on boats to go across the river and go home. So I went first to St. Vincent's to give blood and realized that there was an overwhelming amount of people and they didn't need my blood type. So I made my way to the Jacob Javits Center, where there was just a massive amount of people lined up in circles around the block. What was humorous in a not-so-humorous situation was there was a folding card table, maybe 2x2 square, with two people sitting behind it, handing out flyers of where people could give blood across the city. And that was the information that they had for all of these people wanting to volunteer. And just coming from St. Vincent's, realizing that they didn't need blood, I said to the two people behind the folding card table, "How can I help you? I know that, for instance, St. Vincent's no longer taking blood. How can I help you get this information out so these people don't have to stand online?" And they said, "Oh, no, we don't need any help. We have it under control." And I laughed and I said, let's get serious. Why don't you give me some of those flyers? I'll go around and just start passing them out and telling people where else they can go and what information you had. So it started that way, and I very quickly transitioned to helping the Salvation Army prepare food for the responders that were converging and were allowed to go down to Ground Zero. So Manhattan South, the police unit, had set up a mobile station, and they were checking anyone who had either an iron worker union card or a firefighter ID or volunteer firefighter ID. And if you were any of those three, then you were given a number that was written in permanent marker on duct tape and stuck to you, and you were then prepared to go down to Ground Zero. This is a hard scenario to imagine because you have a convergence of people. You have also a convergence of now donations coming into the Jacob Javits Center. Somewhere in the press it had gotten out that if you wanted to donate items, you need to send them to the Jacob Javits Center. And there was just an influx of shovels and gloves and work boots and all of that, and I just began to manage that. So anyone who was approved to go down to Ground Zero, I and other volunteers put together supplies that they needed.
And how did that lead you to create the World Care Center?
The experience was, of course, very strong and very moving. By working together side by side with so many people that wanted to do so good, of course, there was a euphoria to it. However, that euphoria did not last very long because everyone was stretched to the maximum. Their ability to cope with new and different things was exacerbated, and this outpouring of spontaneous volunteerism to our emergency responders was something new and different. And our emergency responders were really taxed by what was going on, in addition to trying to manage those that wanted to help. And the decisions that were made were purely based on the individual, not on a playbook, not on a rule book, but just if they had the inclination to try to use the volunteers. So that is the experience. It was challenging to try and help. And so I decided with a group of other volunteers that we were going to put together an organization that helped official responders utilize volunteers.
You did that pretty quickly. If I remember right, you were up and running by November. That's a lot of legwork on top of being a responder to this and putting that together. Talk about how you brought it together so quickly, what your initial mission was for what was a grassroots kind of organization, what activities you were doing, and the challenges that you faced in pulling this together in all this chaos.
One of the first things we did even before November was FEMA needed additional volunteers to go in and around Chinatown and disseminate flyers. They needed volunteers to run the family center, and they needed help in organizing those volunteers and vetting them. So one of the first things I did was get together all of the volunteers that volunteered with me at the Jacob Javits Center, which is about 300, and get the message out that help was needed, but this is the structure that they needed to follow. They needed to fill out an application, they needed to show up for training, they needed certain skills. So that was one of the very first things that we did with and for FEMA. Then very early on, we realized that these volunteers that had worked in and around Ground Zero were beginning to show signs of compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma. And those are two mental health hazards of volunteering in such a traumatic event. Being overexposed to these kind of horrific things that have happened and not being prepared to take care of yourself. So identifying that need, we opened a community center that was run by volunteers for volunteers, and we served over 45,000 individuals. Those are rescue workers and their families affected by the work that they did in and around Ground Zero. We learned so much. We learned that you can't sleep where you're volunteering. You need to get away from all of that loss. You need to take a break. You can't work 12-hour shifts listening to victim after victim, which some of the lawyers did. So many of us were overexposed to the work that we did that we began to suffer from it.
You also mentioned training, which I know is a key component of what you do, because, as you said, so many people like Alberto did not have the kind of training, really, that they needed to be responders to this kind of emergency situation. How has your mission evolved since those early days of the foundation? I mean, I know that you have been involved in disaster relief after Katrina. I know that you went into Haiti as well as New York City. How has the mission evolved?
The mission has evolved. It's come full circle. How we responded was basically compiled and put into a training curriculum. The lessons that we learned by serving those who didn't manage themselves properly or weren't managed properly were added to that curriculum. So we want to make sure that not only are those that we're serving safe, but those that are providing the services, the volunteers and the responders, they remain safe. So all of our lessons learned are compiled into this curriculum to make sure that what we've learned during 9/11, during Katrina, we don't have to repeat those mistakes, and we can work together more effectively. Now, in 2007, we closed down the community center and transitioned those clients to some city-run agencies, and we focus exclusively on going into communities and teaching local leaders and citizens how to prevent everyday disasters, how to prepare for disasters, and how to teach local leaders to emerge as disaster managers, ready to manage their constituents as helpers. We also work with the community emergency response teams, which are run by the Office of Emergency Management, and we teach those CERT members how to manage this outpouring of help.
Well, and you certainly got to work out in New Jersey, of which you and I are both residents in this past year. We got hit with Hurricane Irene in August. We had Tropical Storm Lee right behind that. Then we had that awful freak October snowstorm. So we had high water, flooding, down trees, and power outages for the better part of 2 months. Your organization has played a key role here and continues to do in the wake of those natural disasters. Talk about what you're doing here in New Jersey.
We're part of a network of organizations that come together to help during disasters. It's called VOAD, Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. And when we are contemplating a storm, of this magnitude, we get together on a call and everyone basically commits to what they can do. World Care Center volunteered to receive calls from New Jersey 211 of New Jersey's most needy residents that needed muck out and mold mitigation services post-Hurricane Irene. And it was our job to take those calls and match those residents with groups that were coming into the state to provide those services. We received close to 1,200 calls, and we worked with about 27 different organizations and provided muck out and mold remediation to over 590 homes. What we found, though, was that the hurricane was so widespread that there wasn't enough agencies that had this experience to provide all of the services. So we needed to go into the community. We partnered with the Southern Baptists, who are fantastic and very experienced in muckouts, and we began to train the local groups on how to do this very specific service.
I spoke with Elaine O'Neill, who is one of the many volunteer responders you worked with as part of that effort. Elaine and her husband, who is minister, volunteer through Southern Baptist Disaster Relief, which is one of the country's largest relief agencies that probably many people have never even heard of. Elaine is the disaster relief coordinator for one of the New Jersey units. In her day job, she's a band director at one of the middle schools in Rutherford, New Jersey. Elaine, how and when did you first get involved with disaster relief?
About 4 years ago, our church was flooded, and I responded to an email concerning help for flooded homes and churches. And the next morning, a team of volunteers came with their flood relief trailer and equipment. They helped us clean up our mess, and they educated us for solutions for our needs. And I thought that was really terrific. I was so impressed. And then when Katrina hit the Gulf of Mexico, I had a burden to help the victims, but I wasn't able to help at that time. So 1 year ago, my husband, daughter, and I went for training from Southern Baptist. We trained in food preparation, in chainsaw operating, in mud out, and mold and bacteria remediation.
That would be going into people's homes and I assume things like churches to muck them out.
Right. Clean out and also sterilize, take care of the walls that are contaminated, take them out, cut out the damaged wood, and then to make the home ready for whatever the next step is.
Mm-hmm.
Do not replace furnaces. We don't replace water heaters, but we do get them to a point where they can have someone else come in and do the next job.
How and when did you connect with World Cares?
It was when Hurricane Irene hit the Northeast. Southern Baptist volunteers came with a lot of equipped teams to help us with this emergency and to train people in disaster relief. Lisa Orloff, the founder of World Cares, attended a Southern Baptist-sponsored training in South Jersey. After that training, she contacted me as the New Jersey Southern Baptist coordinator for disaster relief.
What happened then?
She asked me if we were willing to work with her organization and meet some of the needs that became apparent to her. I think World Cares is a great organization. They communicate with people, they coordinate the different organizations and agencies that are available, and they find out who has a need, and then they connect the agency, organization, or volunteer group to that need.
What was it World Cares had you doing?
Going into quite a few homes, cleaning out first. You can't even go into some people's basements because there were appliances floating around. There were boxes of possessions that were all destroyed, and they don't even know where to begin. So we would go in and clean all of that out. Then we have to look for mold and damaged wood and sheetrock. After we take out all building materials that are damaged, we go in with a special spray, wash the basement, wash the downstairs. Some people lost their whole first floor, and sterilize it so that the next step can take place.
And if I recall, you were mostly in the Passaic River area.
That's correct. We were in Little Falls, Lincoln Park, Wayne, Fairfield, Woodland Park, and Patterson. So we were given homes to go to. We make contact with the person who's had damage, who's had flooding, and usually it's people without insurance who have no resources. They don't know what to do. And many of those people were displaced for a period of time. They went to live with relatives. They went to live in a shelter. And this really helped them to get back on their feet.
From your perspective as a volunteer coordinator, what do you think World Care brings to the table? How do they help you do your job?
Well, first of all, Lisa and World Cares has set up trainings for emergency workers. So they are going into a certain county, they're going into a certain area, and making training available for the people that are willing to volunteer. And actually, Southern Baptist and World Cares put together a training presentation, and we were able to use it together, and I've used the training several times. And I think Lisa has as well, to train volunteers and people that are already in a town that are emergency workers and just need more training on how to do muck out, mud out, what to look for, the hazards. You have to watch out for mold and bacteria that can all come into your body, and you have to make sure that you are using the right equipment and the right technology to take care of it. You need to make sure that you're not going to be poisoned by bleach. There are some other safer alternatives to using bleach in a basement. People call World Cares and say, I have a disaster, I have an emergency, what can we do? And Lisa connects the organizations with the need.
I understand you're getting ready to retire from your day job. Are you planning to step up your volunteerism?
I sure am. First, I plan to get involved in New Jersey long-term recovery planning meetings with other organizations. I feel that we were very unprepared for Irene. We had seen disasters in other parts of the country, but New Jersey had not had too many disasters. So different civic groups, volunteer groups, Red Cross, Salvation Army, faith-based groups came together. Now the next step is, what do we do to prepare for another disaster or an emergency? And right now, different counties are having meetings to talk about what each group has done, to make each group aware of what other groups can do so that we can work as a team if another disaster comes on. I plan to give training workshops and also to set up a database list of trained workers and volunteers who would be willing to serve in the event of a crisis. And I think that I want to work with people to set up teams. Usually someone doesn't leave their job for 2 months, but we could take retired workers or college students that want to give up 1 week. So what you need to do with all of the volunteers, you set up lists and you set up teams so that a group of 10 people come this week, a group of 20 people come that week, and so that the same work is going on over a long period of time, but different people are taking over and doing the work. So you really want to have a constant flow of workers in a situation. I think in New Jersey this time, a lot of groups came. I saw trucks from all over the place, but they stayed for 2 weeks and then they went home. Well, New Jersey didn't have a big resource center for help. So now we have to take the ball and go with it and set up resources so that we're ready to help when disaster strikes.
I suspect you'll find yourself working with World Cares again.
Positively. Lisa is just really tremendous. World Cares is tremendous. And World Cares also has the contact with FEMA, Red Cross, Salvation Army, and I don't know all of the other groups, but they can see the whole picture. Mm-hmm. I only come in with my group, and we only see a person's home, we see a neighborhood, but World Cares sees the whole picture, and they can look at it and say, well, we really need people over here. The right groups go to the right neighborhood and help.
So, Lisa, is Elaine fairly representative of the volunteers you work with?
I would say that Elaine has a little bit more experience than 50% of the volunteer groups that we work with. The Southern Baptists really are very skilled, and she has experience of doing the muck out and the mold remediation in the past. And of course, our relationship was unique. She was absolutely wonderful, and the Southern Baptists were wonderful. Not only did they step forward and do the muck out and mold remediation, they took volunteers that we trained that were doing their first muck outs and brought them in as part of her team so that they could get experience. And then when we realized, there's just not enough people to help, Elaine stepped forward with her husband, and we worked on a co-facilitated training session for new volunteer groups, and we delivered that training together. And then, as she mentioned, went out and continued to deliver that training separately from each other, but benefiting from both our disaster team development training and her very specific muck out and mold mitigation training.
And these kinds of partnerships are clearly central to what you do. But I know that in addition to serving as executive director of World Cares and the hands-on training that you do and the hands-on work that you do, you're also a recognized subject matter expert when it comes to disaster and emergency preparedness and response. You have published a field manual to managing spontaneous community volunteers in disasters. And I know that you speak, you're a consultant, you're an advocate, and you represent your organization on 9 local, national, and international organizations that are related to this. But you only have a staff of 4. How do you leverage your resources to accomplish everything you do?
Well, volunteers. Our volunteers are fantastic. We are all about volunteerism, and we have volunteers in the office that do administrative tasks, and we have volunteers that go out and do the muck out mold remediation. We have volunteers, facilitators. So not only do we go out and we train other people to manage volunteers, but we basically walk the walk. So we're talking the talk, but we walk the walk. We manage a lot of volunteers, and they do a lot of great work. Partnership and collaboration is the key to success. We have a lot of very, very talented groups that we work with, and everybody comes to the table with a specific skill. And one of the true beliefs that World Care Center has is that everyone has something to contribute. It's our responsibility as emergency managers to find out what that is and properly and effectively place those volunteers. That's our job, and that's what we've been doing.
And how do you fund this?
Funding is a challenge, I have to say. With disaster preparedness, response, and recovery, the average citizen doesn't really understand that there's this whole ecosystem of smaller grassroots groups with a tiny budget that are making huge differences in the community. I don't think people really understood that World Care Center was responsible for coordinating these little groups, and in Elaine's case, the bigger groups, to do this kind of work. They assume that the government is doing it, and we all work together. We're kind of like the foot soldiers, so it's difficult. It's difficult. It's a challenge. We get some individual donations. Of course, more would be wonderful. We get some grants. Some corporations support us. And then we have a fundraiser that's called the Iron Skillet Cook-Off that matches 5 Firehouse chefs against 5 top Manhattan chefs. It'll be October 22nd this year. And that's a big supporter of our programs as well.
Well, you have passed your 10th anniversary now, and a big issue for any not-for-profit organization is sustainability. That gets into leadership, it gets into funding, it gets into a lot of issues. What do you see as the future for World Cares?
Currently, our curriculum is under review by the Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness and the Department of Homeland Security. And if that is approved, we become an official deliverer of this curriculum for the state and other states. And that will play a big role for us. So we'll be able to train on a much larger capacity and become more of an official partner, I would say, with offices of emergency management and government agencies. And while we are going to work on that level, we will continue to go and work in the community with the grassroots and local leaders. That's truly my passion, is going in and finding those local leaders who people automatically turn to if they need help or if they want to help. They expect that those local leaders are going to know how to guide them. And in most cases they do. They have the skills, they have the inclination, but they don't have the specific knowledge on disaster management. So we will continue along that track as well.
Looking back over that past decade, what is it that you're proudest of that you've accomplished? And do you ever look back to the days when you were in the fashion industry and think about how much simpler that might have been in some ways?
Nothing in my life is simple. From running my own business in the fashion industry to starting World Care Center to one of the things that I'm most proud of, which is being a stepmom. Probably my biggest challenge right now in life is learning how to navigate those teenage years. Nothing is ever easy. I don't think anything worth having is easy. Anything worth doing is easy. It's never been for me. I am proud of the team that I work with. I am proud that we were able to publish a field guide that can help teach others, no matter where they are, how to do what we do. I'm very, very proud of the work that we've done here at home for Hurricane Irene and New Jersey's most needy residents, and to go into their homes and help them. I not only do the facilitation, but I've done the muck out. And we also have a team in Haiti that we trained. So we're able to touch the lives of so many people and empower them really to help themselves. And that's a gift to be able to do that.
Well, Lisa, thank you for joining us here today. And how can people find you?
www.worldcares.org. Give me a call at 212-563-7570. And we have all of the information online. Very quickly transitioned to helping the Salvation Army prepare food for the responders that were converging and were allowed to go down to Ground Zero. So Manhattan South, the police unit, had set up a mobile station, and they were checking anyone who had either an ironworker union card or a firefighter ID or volunteer firefighter ID. And if you were any of those three, then you were given a number that was written in permanent marker on duct tape and stuck to you, and you were then prepared to go down to Ground Zero. This is a hard scenario to imagine because you have a convergence of people. You have also a convergence of now.
But unlike Alberto, Lisa was able to get involved as a volunteer in post-9/11 efforts in New York City. Her experiences changed her life, leading her to drop out of the world of fashion to create World Care Center. The not-for-profit organization has found a way to tap one of the most valuable emergency resources, people like Lisa and Alberto who just want to help. Lisa, welcome to DIY World Improvement.
Thank you, Catherine.
You made a visit to Ground Zero on 9/12, the day after, and you ended up coordinating a piece of the relief effort in New York City. Talk about that. I'm especially interested in what prepared you to take on something like that and how that led to you creating the World Care Center.
Actually, I was awoken to humorous in a not-so-humorous situation. There was a folding card table, maybe 2x2 square, with two people sitting behind it, handing out flyers of where people could give blood across the city. And that was the information that they had for all of these people wanting to volunteer. And just coming from St. Vincent's, realizing that they didn't need blood, I said to the two people behind the folding card table, how can I help you? I know that, for instance, St. Vincent's no longer taking blood. How can I help you get this information out so these people don't have to stand online? And they said, oh, no, we don't need any help. We have it under control. And I laughed and I said, let's get serious. Why don't you give me some of those flyers? I'll go around and just start passing them out and telling people where else they can go and what information you had. So it started that way, and I very
You're listening to DIY World Improvement. I'm your host, Catherine Carlozzi. I have a very clear memory of something that happened shortly after 9/11. Alberto, the owner of the yard service I've used for 25 years, told me he'd gone to Ground Zero to volunteer his services. He was a construction worker before he moved to the United States many years ago, and he was sure that his skills would be needed and useful, but they turned him away. This big bear of a man stood on my lawn, and he literally cried on my shoulder. Like so many, he had just wanted to find a way to help. Before that terrible day, my guest, Lisa Orloff, had her own successful knitwear company.
Watch the events of 9/11 unfold on TV, and I thought at first it was a movie. I was surprised to see and learn that it was something that was real. One of the first things I did was to go to the store and start to cook for the people that I thought would be coming to our home and staying with us. Some of the friends that we had that worked down at Ground Zero actually got on boats to go across the river and go home. So I went first to St. Vincent's to give blood and realized that there was an overwhelming amount of people and they didn't need my blood type. So I made my way to the Jacob Javits Center, where there was just a massive amount of people lined up in circles around the block. What was